Welcome to Pen and Perspective, where the story always knows more than it's telling. Every word is intentional, every silence holds a truth. Let's get into it. When my oldest son walked into this house that day, I knew something was wrong immediately. Mothers know. His face looked empty, and before he even opened his mouth, I remember thinking, something bad happened. I just didn't know how bad. He walked in while his father was watching TV and I was in the kitchen. He didn't hug me, didn't sit down, didn't do none of the normal things. And I asked what was wrong, and he just said, "Ask your other son." I knew it had something to do with Marcus. Those boys had been fighting and competing with each other since they were kids. Not physically, not like that. But Marcus always moved through life easier emotionally, more charming, more reckless, the kind of person people forgive before he even apologized. And my oldest son, he was steadier, more serious, more responsible, the kind of child you lean on because you think they can handle it. And sometimes parents make the mistake of leaning too hard on the strong child because they seem less breakable. That's the truth nobody likes to admit. When he finally told us what happened, I remember sitting down because my legs actually gave out a little. I said, "What?" And he repeated it slower this time. I came home and found Marcus in bed with Tiana. I still remember the silence after that. His father muting the TV. Me trying to understand how something that ugly had made it all the way into our family. And I know how this sounds now. Looking back, I know. But my first thought really was, how do we survive this as a family? Because once something like that happens, people stop speaking. Holidays split apart. Grandkids stop knowing each other. Funerals become uncomfortable. Everybody starts choosing sides. And I know people like to act like family image shouldn't matter, but when you come from the kind of family we came from, keeping everybody together feels important. Sacred, almost. We grew up watching families tear themselves apart over less. And somewhere along the way, I think I convinced myself that keeping the family intact mattered more than stopping to fully acknowledge what had actually happened to my son. That's the part I got wrong. But at the time, it didn't feel wrong. It felt necessary. His father said Marcus made a mistake. I told him we needed to handle things carefully. And when I replay that conversation now, I realize how cold that must have sounded to him because he wasn't coming to us asking for strategy. He was coming to us hurt. And we responded like managers trying to contain a crisis, not parents. I see that now. But back then, I honestly believed time would calm everything down. I believed Marcus and Tiana would eventually break up. I believed my oldest son would cool off. I believed if everybody stayed quiet long enough, the family would survive it. That's what I thought I was protecting, the family. What I didn't understand was that the moment we asked him to protect the family before protecting himself, he stopped feeling like he belonged to it. When he stood up to leave that day, I thought he just needed space. After he walked out, the house got quiet. Not peaceful quiet either. Heavy quiet. The kind where everybody realizes something bigger just happened than what they were prepared for. My husband turned the TV off completely after a while, just sat there staring at the black screen without saying nothing. And Marcus kept pacing, talking fast, trying to explain himself in circles and saying things like, "Wait, it just happened." We didn't mean for him to find out like that. Like there's a better version of your brother finding you in bed with his fiancée. I finally told him to sit down because his pacing was making me anxious. Tiana was crying the whole time, quiet at first, then louder once she realized nobody was comforting her. And I know this sounds terrible now, but at the time, I really wasn't thinking about comforting her. I was thinking about damage, how bad this was, how far this could spread, how impossible it would be to put back together once people found out. Marcus kept saying, he just needs time. My husband didn't answer right away. He was still staring at the TV. Then finally he said, "I don't know if that boy coming back from this." That was the first moment anybody said something that sounded real. Marcus shook his head immediately, said, "He'll cool off. He's just angry." My husband looked at him then, and he said, "I don't think this is just anger." Nobody said nothing after that, because deep down I think all of us knew he was right. We just weren't ready to admit what that meant yet. I tried calling him after a few days, but I got that familiar no longer in service message. He changed his number. My stomach dropped. He hadn't been back to his house and none of his friends were speaking to us, so we didn't know where he was. I kept telling myself he'll come back. His father never said a thing. Because as a mother, you tell yourself your children will always circle back eventually. That blood matters more than pride. That hurt fades. But 6 months later, when my husband had that health scare and I finally got a hold of him through Darius, that's when I realized this was real. I remember crying on the phone asking him to come home. And even then, I still thought if he heard fear in my voice, he'd come. That's how sure I was of our family bond. And when he asked me if Marcus was still with Tiana, I hesitated. Because yes, they were. At that point, they had already moved in together. And when I said yes, something shifted in his voice. He asked me, so y'all still sitting around eating dinner with them? And I didn't know how to answer that. Because we were. What was I supposed to do? Disown one son to prove loyalty to another? That's how I justified it back then. And that's what I kept telling myself. Marcus was wrong. Absolutely. But he was still my child. And I thought asking one son to forgive was easier than losing another one completely. The problem is, that's exactly what happened anyway. Then he said, Dad almost dying didn't suddenly make y'all good people. And I remember feeling offended after I got off the phone. I just sat there holding it, feeling offended as fuck, honestly. Quiet. My husband was laying in that hospital bed watching me the whole time, and the first thing he asked me was, he ain't coming, is he? I didn't answer right away, because somehow saying it out loud made it feel more real. Then I said, no. Marcus was sitting by the window when I said it, and immediately he got irritated. Not sad, irritated. He said, so he just not gonna come because he mad? Your father looked at him so hard after that. And before I could even say anything, he said, boy, stop saying it like that. Marcus frowned, said, I'm just saying this is still his family. Your father cut him off. He is hurt because of what you did to him. That room got quiet quick, because that was the first time your father had said it that directly. Marcus looked away after that, shook his head a little, then said, I said I was sorry. And that's when Tiana finally spoke up. She said, no, you didn't. Everybody looked at her, even Marcus. She was sitting in the corner holding one of those terrible hospital coffees nobody actually drinks. And she looked exhausted. She said, you explained it. You defended it. But you never actually said sorry. Marcus got defensive immediately, said, what was I supposed to do? Tiana laughed a little after that. She said, you slept with your brother's fiancée, Marcus. Said, there's not really a version of this where you come out looking reasonable. That was the first crack, the very first one. Not accountability all the way, but reality. Marcus stood up irritated, started pacing again, said, so what, I'm just supposed to lose my whole family forever over this? And your father said something I still think about. He said, you should have thought about that before you crossed him. Silence. Marcus stopped pacing after that. Then Tiana spoke again, and this time she sounded scared. She said, what if he really never comes back? Nobody answered her, because at that point, I think everybody in that room realized that was a real possibility. And honestly, that was the first night I stopped waiting for him to walk back through the door. Because to him, our love had conditions attached to it. He felt like we were willing to overlook his pain as long as the family looked whole from the outside. And if I'm being honest, there's truth in that. Marcus married Tiana 2 years later. That wedding was one of the hardest days of my life. Not because I didn't love my son, because every chair I looked at reminded me of who wasn't there. People kept asking about him quietly at the reception. Family, friends whispering, y'all think he coming? And every time somebody asked, I felt embarrassed. Not because my son left, but because deep down I knew why. Marcus and Tiana struggled almost from the beginning. Trust issues, money problems, constant fighting, and sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if guilt was sitting in that house with them too. My husband never fully admitted it out loud, but I think he regretted what we said almost immediately. I think he just didn't know how to fix it after the damage was done. And the longer our oldest son stayed gone, the harder it became to admit we had handled it wrong. Pride settles into people quietly like that. Then Reggie died. And when I saw my son walk into that church after 5 years, Lord, I almost broke down right there. He looked good. That was the part that hurt the most. He had built an entire life without us in it. And suddenly I realized we weren't waiting on him anymore. We had already lost him. We just hadn't accepted it yet. After the funeral, when he came back to the house, I thought maybe God had finally opened a door for us. I really did. Instead, I sat there and then listened to my son explain to us calmly why he no longer saw us as family at all. And the worst part? Nothing he said was unfair. When he looked at Marcus and said, "You didn't make a mistake. You built a life on what you did." I watched Marcus physically shrink. And when he looked at us and said, "Y'all helped make it normal," I couldn't even defend myself because we did. Not intentionally, but we did. We chose survival over accountability. We chose keeping everybody connected over fully standing in the truth of what happened. And in doing that, we lost the son who trusted us most. The last thing he said before he walked out still sits with me. He said, "I built a life without y'all in it. I want to keep it that way." The house stayed quiet for a long time after the door closed. Not awkward quiet, not angry quiet. The kind of quiet where everybody realizes something ended and there's nothing left to argue about. Marcus sat down first and just dropped onto the couch like his legs stopped working. Tiana was staring at the front door, still, like she thought maybe he was going to walk back in. He didn't. My husband leaned back slowly in his chair and rubbed his face for a long time before he finally spoke. And when he did, his voice sounded older. He said, "We lost him." Nobody argued. That's how I knew everybody understood it. Because for the first time in 5 years, nobody said, "He'll come around." Nobody said, "He just needs time." Nobody said, "We can fix this." Nothing. Marcus looked down at the floor and said, "I didn't think he'd really stay gone like that." My husband looked at him and said, "That boy been gone." That landed hard, because he was right. My oldest son didn't leave after the funeral. He left 5 years ago in our living room when we asked him to swallow what happened so everybody else could stay comfortable. We just refused to accept it. Tiana finally started crying, real crying this time. Not panic, not embarrassment. Grief. And between tears she said, "We ruined his whole family." Marcus shook his head immediately, said, "No, we didn't." But his voice sounded weak even to him. Then Tiana looked at him and said something that shut the whole room down. "Yes, we did." Silence. She said, "He loved all of y'all. And now he don't got nobody." My husband spoke before anybody else could. Quiet, tired. He said, "No." Then he looked around the room, at me, at Marcus, at Tiana, and said, "We the ones that ain't got nobody?" I started crying after that because it was true. Painfully true. Marcus sat there staring at the floor like he was finally seeing the full shape of what he'd done. Not just sleeping with his brother's fiancée, losing him. For real? Forever. And the worst part was, there wasn't nothing left to fix. No speech, no apology, no amount of regret was bringing him back into this family. That's when I finally understood something. We spent 5 years trying to hold this family together after it already broke. And honestly, maybe the moment we asked the wrong son to carry the betrayal quietly, that was the moment it died. People think regret shows up loud. It doesn't. Sometimes regret looks like setting a plate out at holidays for years hoping somebody changes their mind. Sometimes it looks like staring at your phone wanting to call your child and knowing you no longer have the right. And sometimes regret sounds like realizing the child you thought was strongest was actually the one who needed protecting too. Would I make the same choice again? I used to say yes, because I thought keeping the family together mattered most. Now? No. I would stop talking about forgiveness long enough to acknowledge the betrayal first. I would stop trying to manage appearances long enough to sit in my son's pain. Because the truth is, Trying to save the family is exactly what destroyed it. My husband died 2 years after Reggie's funeral. Heart gave out in his sleep. And the truth is, I think losing our oldest son broke something in him long before his body finally followed. Marcus and Tiana didn't survive either. Turns out betrayal doesn't magically turn into trust just because people get married. Who would have thought? They stayed together almost 7 years total before she cheated again. Not with his brother this time. But honestly, I don't think that mattered, because by then the damage was already built into the foundation. Marcus lives alone now, still trying to put pieces of his life together. And me, I still think about my oldest son almost every day. In small moments, like when something funny happens in the family and I instinctively think I should call him. Then I remember I can't. Not because he's dead, because we lost him while he was still alive. And honestly, that's the ending we deserve. You've been listening to Pen and Perspective, where some people regret the fallout, some regret the decision, and some don't regret anything at all. I'm Miana DK, and before I put my pen down, tell me whose perspective you'd like to hear next.